Привit! Vladimir Putin is desperate for things to go his way here in a very chilly Ukraine as we start 2026. And this year will prove to be pivotal, especially the second half, if he's going to be able to continue his full-scale war against Ukraine. Привit, once again, I'm here in Odessa, Mama. As you can see behind me, it is freezing, and here in Odessa it's actually a lot warmer than the rest of the country. It is going to get down to minus 20 degrees Celsius in a lot of Ukraine and the broader region in the next week. Here in Odessa, we'll probably be about minus 10, minus 12, minus 13. So even though we're warmer than the rest of the country, it is a very tough part of the year, and Russia has tried to take advantage of that from their point of view. They have bombed the energy infrastructure here in Odessa about a month ago, although certain parts of Odessa are without electricity part of the day. Most of the city is still okay. In Kyiv, the capital, it has been particularly bad over the last week. One of my clients was there, and yeah, they went, I think, about 3 days with no electricity, and still parts of the city are waiting to get it turned back on, and that is a direct result of Russia's bombing campaign, which has targeted that energy infrastructure in order to punish and presumably to try and intimidate the civilian population into demanding that this country surrender to Russia's demands to come back into its sphere of influence politically. And history shows us that unless you are making big strides on the battlefield, then bombing the civilian population doesn't work. In fact, it's actually normally counterproductive. And also in the last week, we have seen Russia fire for the second time its Oreshnik missile. Basically, this is a rocket system that's it's not really long range. It's not intercontinental. It can hit other parts of Europe, so Western Europe, and carry nuclear weapons. However, it's quite an expensive system to use, and Russia's fired it for the second time. They fired it about a year ago at Dnipro, the city, and now they have fired it again, this time at Lviv. However, it is a little bit of a Wunderwaffe in the sense that it's not a game changer. It's just an expensive delivery system. In terms of the Russo-Ukrainian war, they can already hit everywhere in Ukraine using other weapons like Iskander or caliber missiles, and some of those can even, in theory at least, also fire nuclear weapons. So it doesn't really do anything. It is something to have an intimidatory effect. I can say personally, having been here, I saw on my phone a warning that Russia was going to be fired. So it doesn't even have the advantage of stealth, because either they told the Americans they're going to find, hey, we're firing this, but it doesn't have any nuclear weapons, or the Ukrainians can even tell. And because it's new, I did go to the shelter as opposed to other warnings, because I don't really know this thing can fire nuclear weapons. It's not likely that it has it on it, but let me not take the risk. But this is the second time it's been fired. Am I going to react the same way if they fire 10 of these? Probably not at that point, because it is no more destructive or dangerous in how it's fired, since it's fired without nuclear weapons, than lots of the other delivery systems and missiles they use on a daily basis here anyways. So I'm telling you this to point out that Vladimir Putin fired it because he's running out of options. That's the bottom line. It's not going to change the course of the war, but he's looking at what's left in his arsenal, and it is depleting rather fast. Almost no progress on the battlefield. Last year, they took 0.7% of Ukrainian territory. Yes, less than 1%. They probably had somewhere in the range of 400,000 casualties. Very hard to confirm those either way, because, well, Russia's not going to publish real figures. Neither side is in this war in terms of casualties, so we have to do best guess estimates. And if anything, they are slowing down in terms of the amount of territory they're taking. I have listened to some counter-arguments saying, no, the Russians are just destroying the Ukrainian military. There's no evidence of that that they can provide, that the Ukrainian forces are about to collapse militarily. The EU just just announced about a month ago that they will fund Ukraine for the next 2 years, so it's very unlikely Ukraine will collapse in the next 2 years. and nor is it likely that Russia will have suddenly a huge advance on the battlefield. Again, there's no evidence that's going to happen. So Vladimir Putin is looking at a situation where, for the first time since they started to pay soldiers huge amounts of money, that was about at the end of 2022, to join the Russian military, they are recruiting less soldiers and then they are losing on the battlefield. That means that their number of troops, their army is actually getting smaller, and that will build up a lot of pressure for him to go for another mobilization. He went for a partial mobilization as a stopgap back in the autumn of 2022 when his initial invasion had clearly failed to reach its strategic goals. They didn't manage to capture Ukraine within 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever timeline you want to put on it, but it was definitely short term in any case. And now we're about to go into the 4th year since this invasion. It will be on 24th of February, so we're almost a month away from that. And his economy, as I predicted 2 years ago, really started to hit major problems in late 2025. It is basically in a recession already. And one big problem that they have that's been exacerbated by Donald Trump's actions against Venezuela. Potentially, we're going to see the Iranian regime maybe collapse in the next few weeks, and the Trump administration's decision to start seizing oil tankers that are part of the so-called shadow fleet by Russia is the oil price is very low, and Russia is struggling to get it out. Exported, the Ukrainians are hitting their oil facilities constantly for the last few months, and that is weakening Russia's ability to finance this war, especially if they're not going to go for a full mobilization or another extended mobilization to get the troops in, because they are going to struggle to pay those soldiers at a certain point when the economy continues to worsen. It doesn't mean that Russia is about to collapse economically tomorrow. It does mean that, looking at the projections, as we go into the second half of 2026, no mobilization, it becomes extremely hard to continue to fund this war if the oil price stays this low. And on top of it, Russia, because of these sanctions, they need to offer a big discount. They're using up their gold reserves to keep the war going. At the moment, they can do that until the second half of 2026. However, when we get to that point and there's no big progress on making breakthrough on Ukraine, and maybe they've taken 0.3% of Ukrainian territory in 2026, at that point, let's see what it turns out to be. They are going to be in a crisis situation. Vladimir Putin is going to be out of options. He's going to have to go for mobilization. I don't see how he gets around it at that point, in a desperate last-ditch attempt to try and change the course of this war. Now, a lot of things can happen between here and then. Maybe the oil price rebounds and suddenly he has tens of billions of extra dollars and euros in order to spend on this war. But at the moment, it is looking really, really grim from the Russian point of view. Just to remind you, they spend 40% of their budget on this war and internal security. That's what they officially spent. And we have to rely that these Russian figures are actually, anyway, accurate. Their inflation, super high. You think that the US has a cost of living crisis. You should look at Russia's. Officially, the inflation rate is like about 10%. However, when we look at even vloggers who have to be very careful in Russia itself vlogging now, they are talking about huge price increases of the basic stuffs that they need every day to keep going. So it all looks very, very grim, and it's been exacerbated by Donald Trump, who may like Vladimir Putin. That's what he keeps saying all the time. He rolled out the red carpet for him in Anchorage last year. However, Donald Trump has a big political problem himself, which is the midterms and the cost of living crisis in the US. At least that's the way it's framed. And because he went into this, in my opinion, crazy, loony tariff policy in 2025, in his first year of his second term as president, he needs to get the oil price really low, because that will have knock-on effect across the economy and lower prices. And that, at the end of the day, it's the economy stupid, to use that slogan that Bill Clinton used very effectively when he was running for president in the early 90s. That could turn the tide in the midterm elections and actually allow him to avoid being a lame duck president in the second half of his term. So for him, it's really, really important. So we are probably going to see the US continue to put pressure on those oil prices. They want to get low. He doesn't care if that hurts Vladimir Putin and his war. So all of this is compounding. We see also that Donald Trump has gone for more hostile action abroad with capturing the Venezuelan President Maduro. He doesn't seem to have gone for regime change in Venezuela so far, but now we see the mullahs in Iran under a lot of pressure, and Trump is also promising some sort of action there to support those protests. And we may see another oil-producing nation that has sanctions against it. What would happen if they were overthrown and suddenly there was a pro-Western regime in Tehran? Well, we would expect there to be more oil pumped out in the medium term onto the oil markets, and that again would push the price down. So all these factors are coming together. It's all very bad for Vladimir Putin. He doesn't have much to be happy about in the last few weeks. It looked great for him when Donald Trump, after say a couple of months of the Trump presidency, we all remember that infamous diplomatic debacle in the Oval Office when he started shouting at Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, kicked him out and started rambling or ranting about how he should be more grateful that he doesn't hold the cards, all these different sound bites. And right now, it looks like Vladimir Putin is the one who does not hold the cards in the Russo-Ukrainian war. I predicted at my end of year live stream about this war on my lifestyle channel that it's probably 50-50 in 2026. We'll see at least a temporary pause in fighting. But looking at what would happen in 2027 if it doesn't stop this year, it looks like, in my opinion, like an 80% probability, looking at the evidence we have now, that it will have to come to an end because Russia will not be able to continue the war. Might be able to do it if they go for full mobilization, but we don't know what the reaction will be from the Russian public when they're being forced to go en masse to die in the cold fields here of Ukraine for Putin's imperial glory. In this year, if it continues like this economically, Putin is going to be even more desperate, and he may go for that option. So let's see what happens. This may all change. It's a final thought. If Donald Trump decides to try to annex Greenland with military force in the next few weeks, that sounds absolutely batshit crazy. But he said it so many times at this point that we got to take it seriously as a possibility. I personally think that's less than 50% that's going to happen. I think at the end of the day, the US Congress will persuade the Trump administration against doing that as a course of action. Let's see what happens. Drop your comments down below. If you're planning to come here to Ukraine in spite of the cold weather that we have at the moment, then I have my guide, insider's guide for coming to Ukraine during the war. Not only do you have the logistical and safety information about how to travel and stay as safe as possible, obviously, this is the biggest war in Europe since World War II, so you need to be cognizant of that, even if the statistical chance of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and being injured, been a casualty of this war as a civilian in a city like Odessa or Kyiv is 1 in a million when I put it into ChatGPT on any given day per capita. Still, you need to be cognizant of that. If you are coming here, the biggest advantage of the guide is my hospitality section where I outline the cafes, my favorite cafes, restaurants, bars and shisha lounges. Not so much clubbing going on in Ukraine outside the Zakarpatsky Oblast where there's no curfew at the moment, a little bit in Lviv maybe. And I have that for 5 cities: Kyiv, the capital here in Odessa, Mama, Chernovtsi, Lviv and Uzhhorod in the west of Ukraine. So that will just save you a lot of time and make your trip here a lot more enjoyable. If you're coming, stay safe as possible, do your best to support Ukraine, and do peremohi, slava Ukraini from Odessa, Mama, in free Ukraine.